Ambassador Kavalec, thank you very much for doing interview for Focus. I suggest we start with questions.
Sure.
So, at the end of last year, the OSCE mission in BiH published a report on school names and symbols, indicating controversial school names, school symbols, and school events. According to the findings of the report, we could see that this problem exists in almost all parts of BiH. What is your comment on these findings?
Well, first of all, thank you for your interest in our report. We felt it was important, based on the findings that we have, based on looking at over 2,000 schools in Bosnia and Herzegovina, to raise awareness of the problem that continues here in Bosnia and Herzegovina of the use of divisive school names, symbols, and manifestations. While there had been some progress in this area between 2004 and about 2012, since then we see a lack of progress and even some backsliding in this area. And we feel this is another example where education remains politicized, where it creates tensions, concerns, and particularly we worry about students because this type of politicization of the schools leads to feelings of exclusion, feelings of reinforcing or trying to reinforce so-called ethnic divisions, and we don't see enough political attention being focused on this. We wanted to raise awareness both for the authorities and for parents that this remains an unaddressed issue in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
So in the report, it stated that school names, symbols, and manifestations are used as one of the ways to implement the policy of division and one-sidedness. Why do you think this is done? Why is education used for these purposes in Bosnia?
Well, it's definitely done in the interest of reinforcing political interests. It's done to reinforce the idea of ethnic identity and to strengthen certain political parties whose approach is based on single ethnic identity. And unfortunately, this is done at the cost of the quality of education and at the cost of students who may or may not feel comfortable with this kind of approach, who are being inculcated in this idea that there is some basis for ethnic division. I think it comes down to politics, unfortunately, being brought inside the schools and being used in the interests of political parties and those who want to base their power on that type of politics.
We are witnesses that in schools throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina, in addition to controversial names, there are controversial symbols in the schools or in the schoolyards, as well as events that are held at the school and which are not inclusive for all students. What are the education authorities doing on this issue, and why are these names not being changed, and why are the symbols not being removed, actually?
Well, that's exactly the question that we have because we don't see authorities doing enough to address these concerns. And there doesn't seem to be awareness of the harm that this can do and the way that it can make students feel excluded if they are not of the dominant group that is carrying out these manifestations. So we have in our report a series of recommendations for authorities which are based on international standards, human rights standards, as well as Bosnia and Herzegovina's own policies adopted, policies that have been adopted and approved but are not being implemented. And if I can, I'd like to run through some of those recommendations just quickly for school authorities. So for school names that don't comply with the laws and bylaws of Bosnia and Herzegovina, there are numerous options for alternative names, such as the name of the town or community where the given school is located, numbers, for example. It is our recommendation that all controversial school symbols be removed from locations in which they are not permitted. All religious symbols in classrooms, halls, hallways, administrative offices, and other locations should be removed or relocated to dedicated classroom for corresponding religious education project. But if that classroom is also used for other subjects, those symbols should only be there during religious education classes. Every effort should be made to make sure that any school manifestations are organized in a welcoming manner for all ethnic groups. Schools should not bring students into an organized manner to gatherings commemorating the war or political events. And field trips should be optional for all students. And finally, official school days should not occur on religious holidays or on dates related to military victories or defeats or other dates that apply exclusively to students of one ethnic group. So all of these things need to be depoliticized. And we have seen that some schools do this, but there are many that are not.
For years, you've been pointing out discrimination in education and calling for problem solving. Do you think that there is a will in BiH to change the situation in education for the better, starting with the names of schools, symbols, and events? What are your recommendations for resolving this issue so that every child in BiH, in every school, would feel welcome?
Well, that's a key question, the question of political will. On the recommendations, I just listed several that are contained in the report. But let me stress that this is an issue that is not specific to any one area. It is, we see examples of this all over the country. For example, in Sarajevo, in 2016, there was a decision to rename a public school Dobroševići to Mustafa Busuladžić, who is a controversial figure from World War II. This decision was annulled by the Cantonal Assembly, but it has never been reversed. In Republika Srpska, there are 22 schools named after Saint Sava, and in Croatian majority areas, there are several schools that are named after religious figures, including Cardinal Stepinac. So we see this all over the country, and it's important to recognize that these types of exclusionary approaches are, create feelings of difference, exclusion, lack of acceptance for students, and that this is not good for education, it's not good for the community. So there are laws and policies in Bosnia and Herzegovina to address this. They are not being followed in every case. The first, it's the responsibility of authorities to implement the policies that do exist in accordance with human rights standards, with international standards. So first and foremost, they should be carrying out and implementing the rules that already exist, and they need to pay attention to these issues, which is again why we are doing this report.
If we know that the ruling parties, and I consider the HDZ party especially responsible for this issue, 27 years after this war still do everything to have this phenomenon to school under one roof, then there is a question, why talk to such parties, for example, about the future of this country if they are not ready to remove this issue, to solve this issue? In my opinion, there must be zero tolerance for such behavior.
Well, I think we all, we have to continue the dialogue. It's always important to engage, to try to change opinions, to raise awareness, to look for solutions. One of the ways that I think we can address this issue is speaking to the topic of quality of education. I think while there may be disagreement on some issues like symbols or segregation in the schools, everyone agrees that they want their students to have a quality education. So quality education implies inclusiveness, it implies knowledge of the world and the people around you, And you can't do that if you cut yourself off from your neighbors or other communities in your own country. So we continue that dialogue both through our reports, through engaging directly with school officials, with politicians. We raise this all the time, and we will continue to do so because I think it's a topic that's too important to let it go.
Last question is, how do you generally assess the situation when it comes to hate speech? As almost never before, the public is witnessing that those who lead this country, the politicians, and especially Milorad Dodik, incite hatred in public space almost every day.
Yeah, this is another area of huge concern, and as I said, if the schools are not inclusive, when tensions are raised in the community, it will affect the schools as well. We are concerned about the use of divisive rhetoric, inflammatory rhetoric. We have made reference to this in our public statements. We're doing increased monitoring to try to track these incidents, but more importantly, the OSCE mission, through our field offices, we contact local authorities when these incidents occur. We encourage them to investigate, to prosecute, to promote dialogue, to overcome these incidents. But definitely the political dialogue or the political tensions in the country are triggering more incidents of hate speech and aggression in everyday life. And this is something where we call on all politicians to refrain from the use of this type of divisive dialogue. We know that this year is an election year. The temptation will be to use this type of politics again, and this should not happen. It is not good for the country, it is not good for the communities, and ultimately it is not smart for the politicians themselves. They need to recognize that this is not a sign of leadership, but a weakness of resorting to this type of rhetoric.
Ambassador Kavalec, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you so much, and I hope we have the link to our report on our website, so I hope everyone who is interested will take a look.